Yeah, many thanks for these exciting presentations, these exciting talks. A lot of food for discussion, I guess, before we move to the real food. Yeah, the floor is open. We have the microphones. The usual rules apply, so please mention your name and your affiliation. And we collect some 3 or 4, have a first round, and for sure we will have a second round then. So, hands up. I can't see hands. I see a hand here. And, yeah, only men. Okay, well, we start here, and then we move to the back. I can't recognize you, to be frank. Is it Michalis? Okay, good. So then Michalis, and then we move further to the back. And as soon as a female colleague wants to raise her hand, please do so. I will take you on the list immediately. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Collard at the Berlin School of Economics and Law. I have a question for Joelle. I'm wondering if you could expand on the real constraints. Usually with MMT, the capacity is emphasized as well as inflation as real limits. And I'm wondering if, so in between the flux and the reflux moments, it goes through sort of the market, the dealer hierarchy with the banking structure, as well as through investment and private investment, and these things are driven by behaviors of credit as well as behaviors of investment with profitability. And I'm wondering if profitability or institutional patterns of credit extension factor into the real constraints or where they fit in from the MMT school. Thank you.
Okay, we take next Michalis.
Hi, I'm here. I'm Michalis Nikiforos from the University of Geneva. This is a comment and question to mostly addressed to Joe, but everybody is welcome to comment. Do you think that the developments in, like the debacle in England over the last weeks, shows us that developed economies have hit the limit of indebtedness for the government? Even if one believes or not that there is such a limit, I don't think that we have hit this limit, at least for the developed countries, right? And it would also be interesting to reflect then why this happened.
Okay, we have, I think, one more, right? Okay.
Thank you. Michele Ciruzzi, PhD student at the University of Insubria, Italy. The last 2 lectures have given me this strong impression that not all the demand is equal. Rich and poor emit CO2 at different rate. They have very different marginal propensities to consumption. So my question is, maybe the change we are called to implement in our model is to renounce to this kind of only aggregate level of analysis and insert some kind of distributional sensibility, agent-based, working with distribution, use median instead of mean, or some kind of escamotage to have to put a distribution inside our models. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can take one more. In the very back, I take first the left side, and for the second round I take the right side. Otherwise, I won't never make it. Okay, please.
Thank you. Severin Reisel, European Institute on Economics and the Environment. I have just 2 brief questions for Sebastian about the survey data you showed. The first is, to what extent do you think that the lockdowns can actually, may have distorted in some way the results of your survey, because they might have, because, you know, during the periods during which there was a VAT cut in Germany, at the same time we also had a lockdown, which I think, at least anecdotally, we might suppose that it led to involuntary saving, inability to consume even though you might have wanted to. And the second question was, I found the evidence you showed about, consumption being brought forward, quite interesting. And I was wondering if, because what you showed was qualitative, but I would imagine that if people did indeed bring consumption forward, they would have done so for, let's say, relatively large ticket items, like, let's say, maybe buying a car or a fancy television, something like that. So did you also collect any kind of data about the actual monetary amount of consumption that they brought forward?
Okay, I think this should be enough for the first round. So should we start in the order of presentation? So Joelle, would you like to go first?
Sure.
And I think you have.
Okay. So thank you for your question, Nicholas. So, I mean, I don't concern myself too much with the real constraints because I'm always trying to figure out what's happening on the monetary side of things. But I do think that there are real constraints and that, other economists can be working on those. I mean, I think the institutional framework does provide, either allow certain types of investments to take place and can be binding in certain situations. So I think working in that direction can be really helpful. One of the things that I think can be helpful is something that was suggested by Joe in his presentation is a development bank. I really think that could help. I mean, Keynes really talked about how we can all how do we get all the firms to act together in a cohorted group to lead investment in a certain direction. So, I mean, an investment bank might be a mechanism for us to kind of direct investment in certain key areas to focus on those areas where we really want social investment to grow, or even just our productive capacity to grow. So I think, looking at the economy from that perspective would be helpful.
Michale's question about have we reached rich country debt limits? No, I don't think we have. I think we're probably quite far from them, and I think they're going to have to grow because we're going to have to run deficits in order to do the investment that we need. But I think we can't ignore the potential for financial dynamics to constrain our policy objectives. We did some simulations the last couple of days to try and figure out what would it take to get either flat or falling debt to GDP ratio in the UK. Now, I don't think debt to GDP targets are meaningful in any way, and I would want to get rid of them. But that is the target which the UK government is currently benchmarking against, which means that it's what the media are benchmarking against. So when they talk about black holes, it's all benchmarks against that. So we did some exercises, and what we found was that at the moment, it's right on the cusp between an explosive, using a very simple equation of motion, on an explosive trajectory and a declining trajectory, and the difference is the bond yield. It's not actually the 50 billion of tax cuts that were in the package or whatever. So I think we're in a pretty dicey state because I think there is a good reason not to want to be on the explosive debt path. It's never going to explode without limits. Something's going to stop it. But I think you want to stop it with a policy choice before you're forced to stop it elsewhere. I don't think you want to get into that game of exploding debt to GDP ratio, fighting it with the central bank to try and cap yields, and then the exchange rate taking up the pressure. It's not a good game to get into. So I think it's good to plan ahead on that point. Am I pointing towards distributional analysis? Yeah, I absolutely am. And I think some of the most exciting and interesting presentations I've seen at this conference are the young scholars who are taking traditional pieces of models, the wage share, balance of payments constrained growth, and disaggregating those models and seeing what happens when you have dynamics at sectoral or distributional levels and how the stories change. I think one thing we absolutely need to understand is what are the climate effects or the carbon emission effects of redistribution. And I don't think we know the answer. If we redistribute within countries and if we have convergence across the globe, what is the overall carbon implication of that kind of convergence? The stylized facts I tried to look up, and I find you can't even get a clear answer on this, for any plausible technological trajectory. So yeah, I absolutely agree on the distributional analysis and modeling question.
Yeah, thank you for these questions. Maybe I first answer to Severin. because they were quite specific. So in terms of how did these survey data, maybe how much could they be biased because we had lockdowns? Well, sure. I mean, you can have that, but in this specific period, that was after the summer 2020, when actually there was, in this period, no really strong lockdown measures in place. They only started again, say, in November. But on the other hand, of course, I mean, you could still have that. But when we compare our findings also with the rest of the literature that came from earlier, say, periods and also from other countries, actually, you do not see much of a difference. So, well, at least, so I wouldn't expect that this biases our findings too much. In terms of the question, okay, do we have monetary amounts? No. Actually, we only have this qualitative information. But what we do have is actually the question on what they spent the money, and that was all, with respect to this intertemporal substitution effect, that was all on durables. And probably you expect that then these are things that are expensive. Okay, so at least you would expect some of that. Of course, all these surveys have their, I mean, they have their downsides, and surely you cannot, go into people's heads without losing a lot of information in the end, and I think those people maybe give you also sometimes some strange answers and so on. But on the average, I think the survey data are quite helpful here. So maybe a little bit also commenting on this question of real constraints that was raised here, because I cannot maybe stand to also comment on that a bit. So I think that actually this is quite important in this situation now that we obviously once in my lifetime at least have hidden now this kind of new regime where there are actually these supply constraints. So I mean, I agree too much to a large extent that we should focus maybe our spending on and governance spending on certain categories, but across the board increasing governance spending in this situation and across the board lowering taxation without such a focus, I mean, that is, I think, not what will help us out of this situation now.
No, it works. Okay, a second round, and yeah, we have you in the front. Maybe you start, and then I take the next one.
Hi, my name is Sophie Frew from the University of Greenwich. I had a question about profit margins, profit gouging, which is another part of this inflation dynamic that I don't think has really been touched on, particularly Joe and Sebastian talked about it, but I'd be really interested in the MMT view as well, and is that something that you're concerned with about these market concentration? And Sebastian, please can you explain why you think we shouldn't have price caps on energy? I didn't really understand the savings incentives issue there that you were talking about.
Okay. Did you get that? And maybe you speak to the microphone.
Yeah, at the end of your presentation, you said we should not cap the price of energy because it will have perverse savings incentives. And it would be helpful for you to explain more why you think that is actually real rather than theoretical, if that makes sense.
Okay. Hands up. There is Jan Prive, and then we move on.
Jan Prive, Berlin, HCW Berlin. First, I have a question to Joelle, to the first presentation. It was not clear to me what your definition of money is. You see money as a flow, if I understood it correctly. So that is unusual. That's not the official definition that we use in national accounting and in financial accounting of central banks all over the world. So it's a bit idiosyncratic. Could you explain, please? And second, I would like to ask all speakers. Presently, we have 10% inflation or more in the 3 countries we're talking about. Is contractionary fiscal policy now what we have to do, even if we don't like it? Especially if we do not want to use monetary policy, or only to a smaller extent. So is that what Joelle had in the last line? Maybe you remember when there was rationing and patriotic bonds and all this. This is a kind of other words for contractionary policy, if I understand it correctly. Do we any kind of contractionary policy need for this kind of pretty strange inflation, and also a little bit different in Europe and in the US? Thanks.
Okay, we have right just behind. Who else would like? Don't have. Oh, that's very difficult.
Shall I start?
Okay, I vaguely see your hand. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ilhan Dögüs. I would like to ask Joelle. Yes, I agree with you that interest rates is a distribution variable and determined by central bank. Then where should we park the interest rates? As proposed by Randall Wright to 0, or as a real interest rate, we should park it to productivity growth as proposed by Pasinetti or Merklevoy and so on. And under which conditions and to what extent can an economy tolerate the high level of real negative interest rates?
Okay, we have then one more here, and then 2 in the back, and then we get your answers. No.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't see you. Yeah, right. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I have to stick to my own rules. Okay, please go ahead.
Janina from the University of Witten-Herdecke, and I was wondering how, the panel would evaluate the stimulus packages which have been made up to the point now, including like the gas price or the energy crisis inflation packages, and trying to cling on to this definition of investment, that strategy. If that is something that could be made plausible, because right now it's always about like saving the current structures kind of as they are, and I was wondering what the translation of this making space for the actual transformation to take place, how that could look like more specifically.
Can you take more, or shall we take another round? Okay, so then we first have the responses, and then we take another round. Maybe we now start in reverse order. Sebastian, if you would like to start. Or you're still writing?
Okay. Just finished. Okay, so there was this question about one of my last slides, and how do I mean this no outright cap on prices? I mean, so what the German government now does is that it does not set a limit to gas prices, but on the one hand, it pays households a lump sum as compared to what their gas bill was in maybe last month, something like that. Okay. And secondly, it also tries to to constrain, so to speak, only a basic consumption as compared to basically what households were consuming in the last year. So that is, I think, a quite clever idea in order to not have a cap on prices and therefore distort the incentives to save gas, which we need to do, and at the same time alleviate the real incomes of these households. So I think that's a clever policy, and that's what I was referring to here to a large extent. And that maybe is also connected to what Janina was asking. So to evaluate these stimulus packages, I mean, maybe I can only share my experience here with the German stimulus packages and this, what is currently coming. So a large part of that is basically this idea of trying to shield incomes, real incomes of in particular lower income households. I mean, the issue is here with these policies in place now, with this gas bill break, as they should call it, is of course how do you rule out that high consumption rich households actually will benefit a lot from these things. But there are some ideas here in that were, for example, brought along by Isabella Weber and Sebastian Dulin, who would argue that, okay, maybe you find a solution there to have a maximum cap on these on these transfers. So that's one part of it. And as a general comment, I think that we have to understand now that these policies are not stimulus packages, but they are income saving or income securing policies, and that's important in this situation now. And this refers also maybe to Jan to some extent. I think that what we currently see in that sense is that, of course, so the government goes into additional debt here, but that is only to keep these real incomes of these households at their previous position. So I don't expect that this will lead to additional demand-side inflation. And I wouldn't also suggest to do additional austerity measures, at least from the point of view of the German government in the situation now, because I mean, in the end, we are now headed for a recession, and you shouldn't really do that right in this situation when we are heading for this recession again, to now cut government spending right outrightly. Thank you.
Thanks. And the question about profit margins and price gouging is a really good one, I think. My inclination on this is that windfall profits as a result of price hikes, as a result of shortages, are not the same thing as price gouging in the sense of corporations imposing markups over costs actively, although it's a little bit of a fine distinction. And ultimately, in terms of policy terms, I think it leads you to the same place, which is that these are windfall gains. If we think in terms of gas companies, you know, a gas company which sees the national price of gas rise, it doesn't see its costs rise, it sees massive windfalls. We see measured markups increase. It's a bit academic at that point about whether we're saying, did the firm impose those markups or did they kind of happen to it? The obvious policy choice, I think, is a windfall tax. But I think in terms of, I find it hard to think of a model where you get sort of continual price rises as a result of ultimately bounded increases in markups. I mean, you can't go past you can't take the profit share past 100% or whatever. So I wasn't quite convinced by the story that it was about markup pricing. Do we need contractionary fiscal policy, and what kinds of sort of constraints do we need? A kind of related questions. Let me see if I can do them together. I don't think we do want contractionary fiscal policy, but we need to be aware of two things. One is the potential for financial issues in terms of problems of financing the government debt, and we just disagree on whether you can have a financial limit. Ultimately, I think there is a financial limit, and that's one aspect of setting the fiscal stance. The problem is, it may take you to a different place to what you want to do in terms of ensuring full employment, economic activity, and so on. Where are the pressures coming from? The external price pressures are mostly unrelated to domestic fiscal policy, and you have to deal with those, I think, distributionally. Ultimately, if there is less gas to go round, or we have to spend more of national income on gas, the problem is a distributional one, which means things like price caps to protect those at the bottom. I think they should be limited in some way, and they should have some kind of tiered pricing system, as you say, Weber and Dullier. There's also the New Economics Foundation in the UK have proposed a kind of tiered gas price so that all households are guaranteed a certain amount, and then beyond that, if you're running big stables and swimming pools and whatever, then you get stung and you pay world price. So that's a distributional issue. It doesn't really have a direct sort of fiscal stimulus contraction answer, I don't think. But I think we do have to be very cognizant of the fact that we may be getting close to domestic capacity limits and inflationary pressure. And if we want to raise investment, then in this situation, we may have to start looking at contractionary elements. It doesn't mean that overall, a package comes out as contractionary. Is there anything I missed out? Interest rates. I mean, interest rates, all I would say is that I just don't believe that they are pure policy instruments other than possibly for the United States. As I repeat myself, in a world of open capital accounts and multiple exchange rates, you can't set the domestic interest rate entirely without reference to a global interest rate, and that means the Federal Reserve interest rate.
I feel like those are fighting words, Joe. All right. So I wanted to address the first question, which was about profit gouging. And Joe suggested that maybe we should have a tax. I would probably move more toward, in Japan, they have a system where, and this is something that I heard, they have a system where everyone is very polite with one another, and when a firm is seen that they're increasing their prices and it's detrimental to society, they're just given the eye, don't do that, it's not the right choice. And unfortunately, firms in the US and probably in Britain and in the EU would not listen to the government when the government says not a good choice. So we may have to regulate it, you know what I mean? You start to see that, you're like, sorry, you can't do certain activities any longer, or you're only allowed to sell this much. Oh, you hit the barrier, sorry, you can't sell any more than that. So maybe we could think about new ways to kind of stop firms from putting pressure on putting pressure on prices that actually cause a situation that could cause a wage price spiral or stagflation. So I think regulation would be mine, maybe go to, but I don't know. The other question was, how do I define money, and then how I define money as a flow. And yes, I do define money as a flow. So I think that money is credit money, or money created by the government, that it has two elements, an asset and a liability, and both sides constitute money, that money exists independently of the money thing, which is the thing that you're referring to, which is listed in the national income and product accounts. So Keynes made a distinction in the treatise on money. And that's on the very first page of the first volume. So he says, money is, I want to make a distinction between money and the money thing, and the money thing is going to be anything that answers to the word money, like cash or reserves or something like that. And money is going to be considered the relationship, a credit-debit relationship, a relationship between a credit on the one side and a liability on the other. So when you look at money in this way, as a credit-debit relationship, it allows you to see money in so many new dimensions. So it really opens up your thoughts about money and how money is expanding in the economy and how money contracts in the economy. So I do define this more specifically in an article that's going to be coming out in January, open source article in Egypt, so you can look at that. To look at the definition more, or I also published 2 book chapters where I express this view of money and elaborate on it in volumes after the Grenoble conference the Grenoble conference, in a collected volume edited by Louis-Philippe Rachon and Virginie Monvoisin. Then the second question is, do we need a constraining fiscal policy if we don't want to use monetary policy? And Yeah, I don't know if we really want to do a contractionary fiscal policy, but that's what I was saying. Like, maybe we need to think about new ways to kind of address these issues. So maybe, you know, we may think, like in California, my ex-husband's mom lived in California, and I would fly down and visit her, and they have a little sticker on their car, and the sticker on the license of their car tells them what days they're allowed to drive because pollution levels are so high. So because the smog in the LA area is really bad. So if you get the green sticker certain days, they put it on the news. They say on green days you can't drive. So you have to drive with your neighbor if you're going to be driving around to pick up your groceries or whatever. So you always have a buddy, right? So that everybody can drive. And this is California, and I mean it's the US. It's not like Russia or Cuba or China, you know what I mean? Like, so what I'm saying is that the idea behind rationing is not so far away from what's possible for us. We could have a sticker. I mean, it's no big deal. We put a sticker like, okay, you guys could drive on these days and you guys can't drive on these days. So you're going to have to take the bus. You know, so I don't know. Those are some ideas. I'm just throwing them out there, but those are some ideas. So different kind of policies that will help us address the pressure on prices right now that is we expect it to be temporary, and then at the same time pursue an industrial policy that helps us alleviate future possible pressures on prices, especially those that are coming from energy price fluctuations. Ilan Dogas, where do we park the interest rate? We park it at 0, and I really don't believe that the real interest rate exists. I think it's a fiction, and in fact, we all know it's a fiction. It's a derivative, right? Have you ever observed a real interest rate? I have not, okay? None of you have either. It's the truth. So the only interest rate that matters is nominal interest rate, and we should park that at 0. I mean, liquidity preference is going to play a role there. It's going to help us to determine, you know, in the market whether it's slightly higher than 0. But yeah, we should park it at 0. I'm totally down with that. How and to what degree can an economy tolerate negative real interest rates? I think in my discussion, given that real interest rates don't exist, then that question is irrelevant. How do I evaluate the current stimulus packages? And should we develop investment strategy? Yes. So this question actually was the big topic of a talk I gave in Quebec in February. So I was giving the talk in February in Quebec for where do we go from here, you know? Like, we are in this really bad place, so what do we want for Quebec policy and what do we want for Canada's policy? And the thing that I suggested there is like, let's take advantage of this moment. I mean, I think you were speaking to that point as well. It's like, let's take advantage of this moment. We need to redirect our policy structures, our institutional structures in order to alleviate pressure on energy prices. So let's go, let's get green. Like, you know, so I think that, yeah, we should use this moment to, you know, restructure or add to the current structure so that we can have the kind of economy, build the kind of economy that we want. We don't have to live in the economy that our parents lived in, and we should not. It's not working for us. You know, let's make it work for us. We have new goals, new directions, and that's where it should be headed.
Okay. So. Further or? Okay. I think we have time for a short, quick, to the point round. So please, I have the 3. I don't want to add more unless I have 1, 2, 3, and then we close. And I'm sorry to the others because we have a time constraint. But please be short. Just a short question.
Thank you. So Jay Pocklington with the Young Scholars Initiative. I want to pose a question and see if there's a post-Keynesian answer on maybe the best historical analogy that I can think of, which is war. We have a war economy. We have a lot of dislocation. We have both using every available resource, at least in the advanced economies, to fight that war. And that was the same thing we did in the financial crisis of 2008, but this time is different because now we have actual physical dislocation. Okay. And now we have
the question, please.
The question is now: is this readjusting of prices a function of these prices need to be readjusted over a period of time, and therefore we have to look at these periods of maybe post-war or other periods that actually have had a similar analogy. Is that the right analogy to look at these actual structures?
Okay, we move on to the next one, please. I'm sorry, I have to...
On the last point of...
no, sorry. No, we only had the three. No, he's now gone. Paulo dos Santos, okay, then we take only the two, because otherwise
I'll try and be
don't
very quick. Joe, you're pointing to the end of the affair, and you're pointing to a regime change in macroeconomic thinking, one that is sobering. If you're in a world where macroeconomic management is looking at the demand side of things, we naturally go to places where solutions take the form of positive sum games. Wealth effect, boost consumption. Find spaces for when distribution shifts in favor of labor, we get more growth. Or we have no fiscal constraints. When you go to the supply side, it's trickier. And we are entering a period where it is realities of disruptions, of having actual physical targets of output and of industrial structure guiding macroeconomic policy. With that in mind, I was wondering if you could comment on what you see as the analytical and ultimately political challenges that heterodox economists and people involved in center-left politics are going to face in trying to get us to where we want to be in the face of those challenges. Thank you.
Okay. Good. I think we have to close here, unfortunately. So if you briefly want to respond.
You want to take one more? You said three.
Well, the third one is gone. One more? Okay, so then I cut you off and I shouldn't have.
Just because I want to think about Paolo's question for a second.
Please, Sergio.
Thank you. It's very strange to listen to me that there is not a real rate of interest. Because, you know, you have said during your presentation that a change in the money rate of interest has an effect on the monetary cost of production. So if you have a given money wage rate, this means that you have an effect on the level of prices and so on the rate of profits, you know. So the rate of profit, you must relate it to something that is a real rate of interest, no? So it's very strange to see that we do not see a real rate of interest. In the sense that we do not see neither a rate of profits, but this does not mean that they do not exist. So I do again the question raised before. Okay, so is it possible for a long time to have a negative real rate of interest in a capitalist economic system?
Okay.
I think that this is a problem.
Okay, good. So the question is raised and we have the quick answers, please, because there's pressure from the administration.
Which order do you want us?
Yeah, please, go ahead. Please, we start from right to left.
Okay.
And if you don't have to say anything, you can also say.
Yeah. Paolo, I have to give a quick answer because we're hungry. I think in analytical terms, we need to identify the correct pressure points. And as you say, we're into a world, I think, potentially of zero-sum games, and we need to know where do we squeeze. And that's very difficult. I mean, one question I have, I don't know the answer to, is to what extent are monetary hierarchies zero-sum games? When countries at the top of the hierarchy exercise their monetary sovereignty by expanding purchasing power, importing from the rest of the world, potentially generating inflationary pressure, is that a zero-sum game? And do we need to think it in those kind of terms? Now, what are the political constraints? They're a completely different world. You know, politicians don't understand the stuff we're talking about. They see £60 billion black hole, government missing, this kind of stuff. So I think in the UK context for this kind of stuff, and I think I do, my political strategy is to look for what look like minimal, meaningful, but technocratic changes that move you hopefully into a place where you can make policy. So saying something like monetary fiscal coordination feels kind of anodyne and boring, but actually if you can set something up that works better than we've got, it changes the game substantially in terms of managing that zero-sum game through the tools you have. I stop there.
Okay. If you want, you can, but short, please.
Okay. I mean, I'm just going to deal quickly with Jay's thing, and then I'll deal with the second one that was posed. So I mean, after the war, the First World War and after the Second World War, I mean, you can read about the types of policies that were, you know, in the air at that time in order to address that potential inflationary pressures on the market of, you know, how things might work. And I was able to, I mean, I was like eating it up through the collected writings of Keynes. So I feel like this is something we really need to study so that we can understand what are possible actions that we could take now in order to work better in this new situation. I mean, the thing is, back in the day, what they did, all of a sudden we need to increase interest rates. So they just increase interest rates and that kills the whole economy. But there are other things that were used during the interwar periods, and then after the Second World War that helped to alleviate pressure on prices and helped us to restore prosperity overall. And I think that we need to maybe look at those possibilities. So the second one, to answer the question of the real rate of interest. So the way that I look at the rate of interest, I follow Keynes from, I think it's chapter 19 or of the general theory, and he uses a theory of the own rates of interest. So the own rates of interest means that we have the rate of return on an item over a period of time. So I think about a profit rate, for example. I look at the real profit rate over time. So the change in the profits today relative to the change in the profits in the future. So it's not saying that I don't believe a profit rate exists, it's saying that I don't believe a rate of interest exists. I believe the rate of interest is the rate of return on money over time, and I believe the profit rate is the rate of return on production over time. This is not a real rate, but a rate given by the rate of return on money valued items. So I don't fall into the trap of, you know, even the capital controversies by using that, and in fact puts me definitely in the fundamentalist Keynesian camp.
Okay. Sebastian, and short, please.
Yeah, so since I'm the last person standing between you and the dinner, I think I would suggest that we go on with these discussions over dinner, and I stop here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We're not yet done. Sorry. Please keep seated. Please keep seated. We're not yet done. Sebastian already assumed his previous role, but he is no longer the speaker of the FMM. I will give the last word to Andy Watt, who is the current co-speaker of the FMM. So, Andy, please.
So I really am the last person standing. Between you and dinner, believe me, I want to get out of this uncomfortable position as quickly as possible. So I will do exactly that. Speak quickly and to the point. The first thanks is actually to all of you for submitting your papers, for coming in quite difficult circumstances all the way to Berlin, speaking, engaging in discussions now and over the past 3 days. So thanks very much. Do keep coming to the FMM conference. I'd like to thank PICAS very much. We have the new president or chair or whatever the title is, the new head of the PICAS here now on the final panel. PICAS helped us at the FMM to organize the conference this year, so thanks very much for that. We had 7 people. It's a big operation to organize a conference of this size. So on the scientific side, I'd like to thank Engelbert Stockhammer, Annine Kaltenbrunner, Janis de Firmos, Eckhard Hein, Heike Jöpkes, my colleague Jan Beringer, and I was also on the organizing committee as well. So these are the people who put the program together. Now, most of you over the past weeks and months, you've been engaging with something called FMM at Böckler.de, .de auf Deutsch. So behind that sort of functional email address or the software we use to communicate with you, there are actually human beings, right, who end up answering your queries and your questions. I'll pass them on to me and others. So I'd like to thank Sabine Nemitz, who's standing over by the wall. Felicitas Kaiser, Therese Lagermann, student assistants who've been helping us prepare this conference as well. There are There are other people who you see at the reception who've left from the Hans-Böckler Foundation. I won't mention them all by name to save some time. So we met here now in this new hotel for the first time. I don't know exactly how many years, but it's more or less like 2 decades we were in this hotel. Many of you know it, with this sort of 1970s charm about it in Steglitz. So we're not going to be there anymore. We can't be there anymore because it's actually really physically shutting down. I hope you like the sort of the new place we picked. We're certainly going to be reflecting on how to hold the conference next year. Why do I say that? Because I'd like to encourage you when you're perhaps on your way home, if you have ideas for improving the way the conference works, do write to this famous email address, when these warm-bodied human beings behind it will relay any suggestions you have to us, and we can use those in our reflections to improve the conference. So I'm done. We're done. Enjoy your dinner. Have a safe journey home, and come back next year.
And thanks to Andrew as well.